Hey, do you think that the Albany politicians are full of hot air? Well, the gas issue is an important issue this year, and we're going to be speaking with a resident and business owner from Hamburg, New York, who just visited Albany to talk with legislators about what might be going on with the natural gas ban that they're talking about, as well as a few other issues. It is all here on this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Linden Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and welcome everyone to today's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. With me today is Jimmy Butera. Jimmy owns Butera's restaurant in Hamburg, in Erie County. He's also a resident, obviously, of there. Jimmy, how are you doing today? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be maybe a restaurant owner. People are always interested to hear how people got to where they are today.
Oh, Chris, thanks for having me on. I've been in restaurants my whole life. My grandfather and grandmother had pizza stands at the fair that I worked at since I was a little kid. Just gravitated to the industry. I always thought that we're always going to need to eat, so might as well align myself where I'll never go hungry in restaurants. So that's how I kind of came to the restaurant industry. I'm doing working for myself now for the last 18, 20 years.
And you're not only working for yourself, but you got your family involved at least a little bit, right? Tell us a bit about that.
Absolutely. So my wife and I are both full-time owners. Two of my four sons are 15, so they're able to work with us and work for us. One of them is a pizza extraordinaire, if you will. Taught him everything I know about it, and he's crushing it. My other son is either in the dish room or on the fry line making fries and or hosting and helping on the front of the house.
Now, you've actually made a name for yourself in the restaurant industry. You have a position with the New York State Restaurants Association, and through there, you've visited Albany several times, including most recently. Tell us a little bit about that organization and what you guys did when you went to Albany.
So the New York State Restaurant Association is also, aligned with the National Restaurant Association, and the goal of it is to advocate and educate and fight for, the small business, or not even small business, restaurant industry, hospitality industry across the board. In doing so, one of our objectives is we'll travel to Albany and we'll lobby our state and local representatives on hot topics. A few years ago, we were all over it on the tip credit going away. Now, this past trip, we were, really lobbying hard against the ban on natural gas. Even though the hospitality industry was given a 15-year state of grandfather clause in, it doesn't help. It doesn't help the restaurants. It doesn't help the communities. It really is, in my opinion, it's not the right time to enforce this. It's definitely a great idea going forward if we could get things a little bit, on our grid a little bit better controlled. But as it is right now, I think, forcing people to switch to solely electric it's not a smart call at this time.
Can you explain most people, they only go to restaurants to eat. They rarely go back into the kitchen and see how things are done. What role does natural gas play right now in the restaurant industries? Is it only certain types of restaurants, or is it more broad throughout the entire restaurant industry?
So natural gas is 90% of our equipment is run on. Years ago when we had the October storm, I was just opening up 2006, and I was able to open my doors because all my equipment ran on natural gas. We didn't have power. I didn't have lights. I didn't have a cash register, but I had natural gas. And ovens were on, fryers were on, and I was able to produce food for people. And it's a big need when there's a power outage in the area. People need to eat, and they can't do it. They try to get it out, in restaurants and such. And if we can't provide for them either, it could go bad really fast if there's nowhere for substance, especially on winter days like we're having lately. Our plow drivers, they need, sometimes they're working 3-4 days straight through a storm, and they're going to need places to eat. And when there's no electricity to do that, it's going to be hard to feed the masses.
And Jimmy is in his restaurant now, so that's the background noise that you have. So this is live, folks, in case you're wondering. You were actually involved most recently in helping feed people during one of the many blizzards. I think it was the blizzard, or no, maybe it was this. Maybe it was both. I don't know. Tell us what you did and how your restaurant was able to help out, and maybe how you personally were able to help out.
Yeah, so this past winter we experienced a couple of snowstorms back to back, Thanksgiving and then again around Christmas. The day after Christmas, 7 feet of snow on the ground. I was able to get into the restaurant, and once there, I made some key phone calls. County plow drivers were a few days without food, so I was able to get them some pizzas and sandwiches to keep them solid and going. In doing that, I got a phone call from the Mercy Hospital, which is a hospital in South Buffalo here in Erie County, that had to feed 600 of their employees and guests, that they were running out of food. So, think about it. We had Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday, with bad weather, road closures. So they couldn't get resupplied. So we were able to pony up about 300 meals. I had another restaurant around the corner from us that I teamed up with, and together we were able to, feed somewhere around 650 guests. And when I say guests, they're patients, family members that were there while they were visiting or whatnot, got stranded at the hospital. So we were able to take care of quite a few people that day. That normally, wouldn't be a problem, but because of the bad weather we had, it was a real big issue.
I'm thinking of Chris Berman's "No One Circles the Wagons," and Jimmy, you represent, I think, one of those wagons that steps up to the plate when it's needed. Just a reminder to our live audience, we're speaking with Jimmy Butera, who's the owner of Butera's Restaurant. He's talking about natural gas issues after his trip to Albany. If you have a question and you're in the live audience, then feel free to put it into the chat, and I'll try to read it if we have time. So Jimmy, tell us, are there examples of restaurants that don't use natural gas? And if there are, what happens? Well, I guess it's an obvious question, but what do they do when the power goes out?
Well, Chris, I know there are some places out there that are transforming and moving into that direction. I haven't had any feedback from any of them yet. The ballpark has a lot of equipment that they've converted into electric, mostly for buffets and such. So, to be honest, I haven't gotten any feedback either way. The few that are converting, it's all brand new to them as well. So, I reckon it would be 1.5 to 2 years before we get some real solid, feedback on how disastrous or how well it goes.
It reminds me of another question, and that is, if if a lot of restaurants go towards electric, do you have any sense, or how might we be able to get a sense of what kind of pressure that might put on the power grid? I mean, how much energy do you use just in your restaurant to cook? Is it a lot more than, say, a house or an industry? I don't know. What do you know about that?
I'll be honest with you, equipping a deep fryer to cook at 350 degrees with just electricity, that's going to take a lot of electricity. It's going to take a three-phase system, which is going to draw a lot of power. Think of it when you're in your house in a room and you got four things plugged in, and then you go and plug in the hair dryer and everything cuts off. That's realistically going to happen almost every single day if everything is run on electricity. How are we gonna charge our vehicles and try to turn all our equipment and get our equipment up to temperature for cooking? It's going to change the way things cook. It's going to change timing. It's going to, there's a lot to it. It's not just like, okay, we're going to replace this stove with an electric stove. Everything we've done for the last, 18 years or so has always been with gas. So when we have to go to electric, everything changes. The texture of the food being cooked, the time of the food. It's going to be reinventing the wheel for all intents and purposes for a lot of us. It's just not going to be, okay, well, now we're on electric and here we go. There's going to be some trial and error for sure.
When you went to Albany and you spoke with people, or maybe in preparing to go to Albany and reading what some state politicians want to do by banning the gas appliances, have you seen, or did they provide you any sort of academic research which gets into these issues that you're talking about, food safety, efficiencies, procedures, things like that will have to change as you move from natural gas to electricity? I'm really curious. Has anybody even studied this?
Not to my knowledge. Nobody in Albany was able to answer any of those questions. There's a lot of unknowns. And again, it's not necessarily a bad direction that we're going in. It's just to force it so quickly without having some trial and error and some research and development happening is where the issue is. We're getting hit with a rainstorm or ice storm this weekend. There are power outages throughout the county right now, but I feel that if everybody was on an electric grid only and no natural gas, we'd have more power outages happening. And there's no evidence of how it's going to flow correctly, or not correctly, but just how it's going to deal with weather issues when there's a more demand for power.
All right, we're talking with Jimmy Butera, the owner of Butera's Restaurant. He's telling us about his visit to Albany and discussing the gas issues. He's also talked about a few other issues. We'll talk more about gas next after the break and some of these other issues. But right now, we'll be right back, as they say.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Hey, welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. Today we've got Jimmy Butera, owner of Butera's Restaurant in Hamburg in Erie County. Jimmy, there was a question about residential gas-powered appliances and specifically about food safety. Right now, might people might not be experienced cooking with electric as opposed to cooking with gas. How big of an issue might that be, or are there many appliances already that are electric in the home?
I feel in the home there are some alternative electric powered things. You got your crock pot and stuff of that nature. But if you're cooking a Thanksgiving dinner, uh, expect your time to be different. Expect your your electric oven is going to work differently than your gas oven. It's going to heat differently. Um, when you get that nice crispy skin with an electric oven versus what you're getting with the gas oven. So there's going to be some minor differences. Um, Cooking on your stovetop, cooking eggs in the morning might not be as exactly like you want them on an electric range versus a gas range. I've only used an electric range once, and it's hard to gauge um, the the temperature. Gas, you're looking at it, the flame's pretty low, it's a low heat. On an electric range, I believe everything just heats up red. You don't know if it's on low heat or high heat, so it's going to change. It's going to be a challenge to get to what you're used to having versus what you have to deal with now.
Well, there's certainly enough experience with residential use of electrical appliances in terms of cooking that once they get over that hump, they probably won't necessarily face the same safety issues that the restaurant industry might face. At home, it would appear that the major gas appliance would be the furnace and maybe the dryer, hot water heater. That's a lot of energy that's going into to do something. And again, what happened recently during the blizzard? There were major power outages, and if all you're relying on is heat or electricity for heat, that could be an issue. Did your power go out at all during the blizzard at home?
No, I got lucky. I live in a neighborhood. All our power lines are underground. My parents not so lucky. As a matter of fact, my parents called me this morning. They're out of power since 4 o'clock in the morning. The house is, getting cold, and And when you talk about a furnace, we need electricity to run a furnace. Absolutely. Without electricity, your furnace won't kick on. Um, but if you're only heating with a furnace, or I'm sorry, with an electric furnace, and you have no power, you have no alternative. At least with a gas stove, you can turn the burners on, heat up some water to help keep the house warmer. There's alternatives with gas that will help in dire straits if the power's out for too long when it's excuse me, guys. When it's sub-zero out there, we're brewing today, so we have a nice Hefeweizen on deck getting brewed.
Right. So you're exhibiting some of your Boy Scout training there and looking at alternative ways to heat the home if you don't have your furnace working. Tell us a little bit about when you went to Albany, you went with your association. Who did you end up meeting, and what was the reception like?
So we sat with Senator Gallivan and his chief of staff. They were very forthcoming, wanted to hear our concerns, took a lot of notes, and overall it was a good experience. And they shared a tidbit with us that they're concerned with about everything going into an electric grid, and that is that you're going to burn natural gas to make the electricity. So where is this coming from? And this ban on natural gas doesn't make sense when you're looking at it like that. We've also met with Senator Sean Ryan's office, who we didn't have an opportunity to talk with him. He was in a rush, but we did sit down with his intern and had a conversation. you could tell some of the direction or the people we talked with were compassionate and wanted to hear our stories. Some weren't really understanding what we were trying to give our message off as. But all in all, if you're not out there pounding the pavement in Albany, you're not trying to make enough change. And as I see it, that's the only way to try to make changes. Get in front of these politicians at their office and, plead with them that to hear your story, because that's really how things are going to make the difference.
So let me get this straight, because this is sort of news to me. They're banning the gas and going to electricity because they don't want to burn gas for whatever reasons, but they need to burn gas to make the electricity.
That's the way I understood it. Yeah.
So, I mean, how do they answer the question of how is this supposed to work if either way you're banning gas?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, and I'm not sure what they're thinking. Again, so as I said in the beginning, restaurants and hospitality industry was given a 15-year grace period to make these changes. But if you look at how many restaurants there are versus how many residents there are, the gas lines aren't going to be maintained. You got one or two customers versus 100,000 customers. So they're not going to maintain these gas lines. So they're ultimately going to force people to go into restaurants to go into an electric only facility sooner than the 15 years. Again, everybody at home's thinking, hey, yeah, I'll just buy an extra stove and it'll be okay, or a furnace. Well, that's great, but if you go 5 years from now, you're not going to be able to get a furnace in the state of New York that's run on gas. You're not going to be able to get a stove that's run on gas in the state of New York, which means restaurants aren't going to be able to get the equipment that runs on gas either, because they banned it. So there's no manufacturers making it for the state of New York. So it's gonna create so many different levels of problems. So yeah, they're saying, hey, we're going to do you restaurants a solid. We're going to give you a grandfather clause for 15 years. At that same time, it's really not a solid. It's going to make things happen a whole lot faster for us. And, with that comes a lot of costs. And where are we going to get these costs, to retrofit our power from a regular house power versus a restaurant, which is going to need three-phase. I put a three-phase outlet in for my brewery a couple years ago, and that cost $6,000, just to be able to get it run into the building to where I need to go, and then additional cost to put outlets where I need them and everything. So the cost is going to be great. It's going to be expensive in where they want us to get this money from.
Interesting. We have a few more minutes left. Although I have to add, when you said maintaining gas lines, I'm thinking of another potential safety hazard as a result. If they're not going to really maintain the infrastructure the way they used to because the demand is less, sounds to me like it's more likely you might have a problem. And then the other thing that I was wondering, and I don't know if this came up, and that is you're really removing a diversity of fuel sources. And that puts you at risk from a security standpoint, from a health standpoint. Have you heard how any of these issues were addressed? Did anybody mention them at all when you were in Albany?
No, nobody mentioned any of those risks or concerns. And again, there's a lot of things that hasn't been thought about. The people making the decisions and making the changes. Are they thinking about all of these things, or are they just thinking about one little positive that's going to come from this? And the list of all these negatives that can pop up and most likely will pop up, are those a thought in their minds when they're making these decisions? I find it hard to believe that they are thinking of things like that if they're pushing it so quickly. Again, I'm not opposed to it, but let's make sure our infrastructure is right. Let's make sure that when we do decide to go this route, that we're not going to have a lot of problems, because trial and error where you're playing with people's lives is not the right way to handle it.
Right. Well, we do have a couple of minutes left, and were there any other issues that came up that might be of interest to the audience when you went to Albany?
In New York State, we are we have a tip credit in place, and what that means is that anybody that's in a position that gets tips, whether it's a server, a bartender, a host, a busser, um, a person at a gas station that's pumping gas, or in a car wash that's wiping your cars down, they're all tip positions. So in New York State, we don't have to pay those wages at minimum wage. There's a different fee for that, and then whatever they make in tips covers that. So it's $7 or $8 an hour that I could pay my servers, plus they make their tips. If they make enough money in their tips to make the 14.20 minimum wage, then all is well. And 9 out of 10 times, the people in the tip wage make well more than what that credit would give us. So if we're supposed to pay somebody $14 an hour and they're tipped out at $28 an hour, they're doing way better than what most other non-tip positions would make. So to change that, and that's what they're talking about now, is to get rid of the tip credit and to raise the minimum wage to $17 an hour. Who's going to absorb those costs? We have to absorb them somehow. If I give 7 of my servers raises to meet minimum wage, and then my 7 line cooks that have been making minimum wage are like, why don't I get a raise? So, the wage thing has always been, a tricky, slippery slope for us. But, to take 15 and 16-year-old kids and giving them $16, $17 an hour so they can bring home a $400 paycheck, that's absurd. There are people out there that are making $14 an hour in their 30s trying to support a family, and I understand that that's a challenge. So there's got to be a compromise. Instead of calling it a minimum wage, call it a livable wage, and then minimum wage could be a different thing altogether for a different class of employee. But a lot of controversy around the tip credit going on, a lot of controversy about raising wages up to $17 an hour. It's just, everything's going up. Your gas prices, all my food costs are going up, everything's going up. And my wage, at the end of the day, when are things going to start to level off? And how many more businesses do we have to lose because all these minimum wages and all these wages are going up, which is increasing taxes, and it's taking a lot more money out of our disposable income, which in this industry is very limited anyways. Restaurants don't have a large diversity of money that they could use for contributing to these cost increases. So it's a big struggle. It's a big stretch for a lot of us to try to manage as they talk about these wages.
That's a great answer, and it just begs so many questions. Or I know begging the question isn't the right phrase here, but it just inspires many more questions that we don't have time to cover. Maybe at some point in the future we'll talk about how inflation impacts your industry and other industries, but that's certainly an issue. There's so many areas in all businesses and all industries where price pressure is coming up that's forcing them to raise their prices, pass some of those expenses on to the customers. It's not necessarily a good thing. We don't want to end too depressed on the show, but we do want to say thank you, Jimmy, for really coming in at the last minute. Jimmy was originally scheduled for next week, but this week's guest got a cold, so we flip-flopped him. But thanks again, Jimmy. Great source of information on this. Keep us up to date as you hear more, because this is an issue that we're hearing a lot of from our listeners and our viewers. They're very concerned, especially those out in rural areas, about what might happen if they can't heat their homes with gas anymore. It's a big issue for them. Thank you for watching. Those who are watching live and asking questions, thank you very much for that. If you would like to be a member of the live audience and you're watching this in one of our rebroadcasts or our archives, just go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, and a sign-up form will be there. I think it's on the bottom of the screen, and you can sign up for free, and every Thursday you will receive an email with the invitation and the link to go into the live studio, so you can be a member of the live studio audience. And it's only members of live studio audiences that get to ask questions to the guests on the show. If you watch the show later, you can obviously watch it on our website, stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, or you can like our Facebook page or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And every Sunday at 1:30, the show is rebroadcast on both of those platforms, and they will notify you when the show starts. So again, Jimmy, thanks a lot for being here, and I'm sure we'll see you again later. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks for having me.